Let's talk about Sudan, because the war there has dipped out of the headlines and the country's basically collapsing. Fighting started in mid-April. It's been unrelenting and it's spreading.
There's always a sound of gunfire somewhere. There's always a sound of artillery waking you up.
The war literally has not spared anyone.
The scale and speed of Sudan's descent into death and destruction is unprecedented.
So if you've not been following what's going on in Sudan, here are 5 things you need to know. Let's start with who's fighting who. There are 2 main players. You've got General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. He's the head of the Sudanese Armed Forces. And then there's General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedti. He leads the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. They're a powerful paramilitary group. The quick backstory here is that General al-Burhan and Hemedti actually used to be on the same side. In 2019, there were big pro-democracy protests against President Omar al-Bashir, who'd been in power for 3 decades. And the 2 generals kind of hijacked those protests to overthrow al-Bashir. But the protesters didn't want the military in power either, so they kept up the pressure. Eventually, a caretaker government was set up with a plan to transition Sudan to a democracy. The 2 generals were part of that. But in 2021, they staged another coup. Al-Burhan took control of the government and Hemedti remained in a powerful position. Over time, though, a power struggle developed between them, especially over a plan to bring Hemedti's forces, the RSF, under the army's command. And in April, that rivalry turned into a full-on war.
They're trying to not just win, but trying to eradicate the other in order to have complete control over the country and its resources.
Okay, so how are things looking right now? Well, a lot of the fighting is concentrated in and around the capital. Khartoum is a war zone. But it's not really clear which side has got the upper hand. The army has managed to hold on to its bases, and they've also got planes. But the RSF controls more territory and some key infrastructure.
They're in facilities like oil refineries and water plants and power plants, some government institutions.
They have more agile vehicles that enable them to maneuver Khartoum's streets. They also have a lot more troops deployed in Khartoum.
About 1.4 million have fled the capital and nearby cities, according to the UN. That's around 15% of the population there. It means a lot of people are still trapped. Civilians are getting killed in the fighting, whether it's from street battles, artillery fire, or air attacks. The RSF have also been accused of terrorizing people.
Homes have been robbed and looted and destroyed, occupied, vandalized, and then there's sexual violence. So it's just one big ball of uncertainty for everyone. What's going to happen to me tomorrow? Is it going to be an airstrike? Will the RSF come and try to displace me from my home? Are they going to try to rob my house looking for money and gold and cars? You just never know.
And the city is barely functioning. Banks and most businesses are shut. Hospitals have been attacked and looted. Parts of Khartoum have had no electricity for weeks.
محاصرين حصار تام لا أكل لا دواء لا غذاء لا كل شيء.
In one horrific incident, at least 71 children and babies in an orphanage died over several weeks because of hunger and fever. They were trapped because of the fighting. That's the reality of the situation in Khartoum right now. And the fighting between the RSF and the army has spread to other parts of the country too. But the next thing you need to know about is what's happening in Darfur, especially in West Darfur, one of its 5 states. An ethnic conflict has flared up again, and the UN says the violence could constitute crimes against humanity.
What's happening in Khartoum and what's happening in Darfur is not the same. It's much worse. It's an old conflict being reignited again.
In 2003, there was a rebellion in Darfur. It was mostly led by non-Arab tribes who felt discriminated against by the Arab-dominated government of President Omar al-Bashir. He responded by recruiting fighters from Arab tribes to fight back. They became known as the Janjaweed.
And they were effective in stopping that insurgency, but at an enormous human cost. They killed, raped, burned, massively displaced up to a third of the population of Darfur as a whole.
Keep in mind that Omar al-Bashir was later indicted by the International Criminal Court because of what happened in Darfur. The Janjaweed were led by Hemedti. In 2013, they were rebranded as the RSF. A few years later, they were officially recognized as a paramilitary force, and their links to Darfur have remained strong. They're aligned with local Arab militias there, and the RSF control many gold mines, a lucrative source of revenue for them. Now, while the RSF and the army are fighting against each other in Khartoum and other parts of Sudan, in Darfur, the army seems to have retreated, and the RSF and Arab militias have been able to pick up their old fights there.
Those militias continue to have the same mindset, the same mentality, and based on that, they continue targeting the same people they've been targeting since 2003.
There are particularly harrowing reports coming from El-Geneina, the capital of West Darfur, including footage of bodies lining the streets. The Sudan Doctors Union says more than 1,000 people have been killed there. Local tribe leaders say it's more like 5,000.
We work with the community researchers across Sudan, and right at the beginning of this conflict, what has come across from our colleagues in Al-Geneina was quite vivid. The situation is catastrophic. This is, in essence, nothing short of a renewed genocidal campaign. They rob and pillage, and they kill especially those who are unable to run, the elderly, handicapped, and the blind.
The Arabs don't leave us alone. When they come, they kill and rape and burn, and we're vulnerable. If we let them, they'll burn our houses with the people inside.
Like Noor, thousands of people have fled from West Darfur into Chad, just across the border. 180,000 people from Sudan have arrived in Chad since the conflict started, according to the UN. But it's one of the poorest countries in the world and doesn't have the infrastructure to deal with a refugee crisis on this scale.
There are no camps. People are trying to set up their own camps using, the clothes or the fabrics that they've brought with them if they're able to. They're looking for shade everywhere. Water is an issue. Food is an issue.
The UNHCR is here. They are doing assessments, and someone told us that they have never seen it this bad, that they are incredibly underfunded. They do not have enough money to help people here with anything.
And this brings us to our next point. The war in Sudan has created an immense need for humanitarian aid, and it's not being met. About half the population of Sudan, 25 million people, now need some kind of help. Aid groups working in the country say they need $3 billion this year, but have only received $446 million. Donors recently promised another $1.5 billion. Still, it's only half of what's needed.
There hasn't been, I think, a wake-up call across the world that this is something that could destabilize an entire region. And we have seen this to some degree in the ways in which, different countries have pledged aid. If you compare that with other conflicts, particularly, of course, Ukraine, you'll see that the amounts pledged fall far short of what's been committed there.
There's another huge challenge with aid in Sudan, and that's how you actually get it to the people who need it most. It's not just because there's fighting going on. Both the Army and RSF have been accused of restricting access to aid and stealing it. Dozens of offices and warehouses belonging to aid groups have been looted, and their vehicles have been stolen. And what's happening, especially in Khartoum, is that Sudanese people are coming together to do whatever they can. Groups of activists known as resistance committees, which were set up during the pro-democracy protests, are stepping in.
They've been playing the role as, the de facto government, I would say, better than any other body on the ground here. They've been able to set up, clinics and help run those clinics. Those with medical experience have been volunteering. It's members of the resistance committees that are trying to connect power grids in parts of the capital.
Our final point is that there really doesn't seem to be any resolution to the war in sight. There have been some efforts to get the two sides talking. The African Union and an East African regional group known as IGAD have been trying to mediate, but the main push so far has been from Saudi Arabia and the US, who've mediated a few rounds of talks in Jeddah. The main priorities have been to negotiate ceasefires and humanitarian corridors so that aid can get in. But it's not worked.
We haven't seen the two sides even honor the ceasefires, and actually ceasefires have been used by both sides as an opportunity to rearm and to ensure that supply lines are running.
Both sides see this as an existential struggle. Neither side is ready to give tactical concessions when they think that they might lose ground on the battlefield or might forego an opportunity for winning.
As for the people of Sudan, they say this isn't their war. What they're focused on is surviving.
Nobody knows when it's going to end. Nobody knows how it's going to end. They don't know if they're even going to survive tomorrow. So they're no longer even thinking about the end of the conflict. They're now worried about their own tomorrow, if there's going to be a tomorrow.
If you want some more background on politics in Sudan, there's a good explainer in our episode about the 2021 coup. And make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss future episodes of Start Here.